They told us to treat minutes like currency, to spend them carefully, never to squander one on a look no one demanded. That's a strange way to start a confession, but it's the only way I know. I was 23, and the metal in my hand smelled like diesel and promise. The boat was an attack submarine, diesel-electric boat turned cold-weather hunter, lean, hungry, and old enough to have a name on the mess table, but young enough to still need men like me to keep the pumps from eating their bearings. We hugged the dark water because that's where the work is done, beneath the patrols, beneath the sky. We ran with a discipline that made simple things ritual, a checklist, a nod, a watch. On paper, the patrols were routine. In practice, they were a string of small dangers that scream for attention. I remember the first transfer like a photograph, a single gust of salt, a steel cable whispering, and a man who was supposed to go to a ship that did not exist. That opening moment is where the whole story compresses. Transfers at sea are ordinary: mail, food, a spare part, an IR slip of a technician moving between hulls. But the thing we received, and the name attached to the receiving vessel, had no record. It was a transfer to a ship that didn't exist. If you want to keep listening, here's the first reason. Undersea operations and transfers are governed by arcane rules and big, heavy procedures because the ocean cheats you when you're careless. Helicopters and small boats move people in and out when you surface. There's vertrep, vertical replenishment by helicopter, for fast, exposed transfers, and there's small boat transfer and rigged line transfer between hulls when conditions allow. All of that takes precise choreography and recorded authority, ship names, timestamps, and manifests. You don't move a man without a manifest. You especially don't move a man to a hull that isn't recorded anywhere in the register. The manifest said RUSS Hargrove, but the registry had no Hargrove. The transfer manifest had a timestamp and a command signature. The hull that received the man didn't exist on any chart. We were a boat that prided herself on procedure. The petty officer in charge of small boats, I'll call him Corbin, kept a notebook older than me and prided himself on the correct wet ink curve of a signature. He scanned every manifest like a man who used to read weather. He did a double take the day the manifest came across us. An incoming transfer, priority, the receiving hull, a name none of us recognized. Maybe a typo, he shrugged at first, and he's the sort of man who believes paperwork has a moral center. But Corbin closed his notebook and tapped the manifest with a forefinger. The transfer was to take place at 0300 in the lee of a small island chain. The method, small rigid boat pickup. The origin, an auxiliary vessel we'd been shadowing. The signature, a code only Flag could authorize. The manifest had a time. The manifest had a code. It did not have a hull number that could be tracked. That's not clerical error. That's an instruction someone cooked up with malice or with cunning. A primer because details matter. The Navy and merchant fleets move people at sea in a few basic ways. A vertrep is a helicopter lift, fast, clear, visible, often used for mail, spare parts, and sometimes personnel when speed outweighs discretion. A ship-to-ship transfer by small boat uses a rigid inflatable boat or motor launch and is the quiet, common way to move a man between hulls at night if sea state permits. If a sub is on the surface or resting on the lee of a landmass, a small boat approaches, the receiving boat throws a boarding ladder, and the exchange is made. The tricky bits are the manifesting and the chain of custody, who requested the transfer, why, and who acknowledged receipt. Good transfers leave paper trails. Ghost transfers do not. We were a boat that liked surprises. We had a radio room and a man, quiet as porcelain, who listened to the VLF and HF chatter for hours. Corby kept a ledger of carriers and hand-decoded long-wave pings the way someone else would keep a calendar. He was the voice we trusted for whether a given instruction came from flag or from fog. He found the authorization buried in a relay packet 2 hours before the transfer, a short burst formatted like a log control from a fleet support ship. It included an authentication tag and a request to accept a priority transfer. The problem, the transmitter's header looked like a flag. The receiving hull didn't exist. That's the kind of mismatch that puts the whole watch on edge. We had a packet that looked like authority and a manifest that looked like a lie. Somewhere in between sits the moment you decide whether to obey. The captain discussed the transfer in a hush of men who'd known each other long enough to read breath. He weighed the risk, leaving a man stranded at sea versus accepting a transfer to a hull that didn't file on the register. He decided to accept, but with rules. Approach with caution, record everything, maintain a shadow-up watch, intercept the boat if it tried anything strange. We were going to do the transfer under light, with ribs and a rescue team standing by.
A transfer is choreography. The small launch approaches, bow to stern, engine low, the wake a small hymn. Both crews wear rated life jackets. A small crew will steady the ladder while the deck watch holds an eye for a surprise. The man who makes the journey usually passes his personal ID across the rails, any hardware, and a note. You do not transfer a man without a paper chain. It's a compulsion older than the fleet. It is how you prove someone was moved. When the rib came alongside that night, it had no flag, it had no deck code, it had one man aboard, soaked and pale, and a logbook entry that matched the non-existent hull's name. The man was quiet. He would not give his name without a manifest. He handed over a small satchel with identification and a transfer slip, the slip signed by a code we could not confirm. His eyes were empty as someone who had been given a task and had no memory of the reason. He moved like a man whom sleep would not hold. Corbin asked the questions: name, origin, who issued the transfer. The man's jaw worked, but he only replied with the name of a ship that did not exist in any of the databases we carried. We moved him below as per protocol, logged the exchange, and the captain issued the routine: medical check, debrief, hold the man until the chain of command verified the manifest. That's where the bureaucratic meat sits. Verification takes time. In our world, time is a thing we cannot lose. The man fell into a rack and slept like someone who had been held underwater and finally let up for air. When you take a man into your boat at night, you also take his story, and sometimes you keep the story because it fits the hull better than the truth. The debriefs were bureaucratic and exploratory. We asked his name, his rank, his ship, his mission. He repeated the ship's name like you might repeat a prayer you don't understand. Our comms sent a message up the chain, and the expected reply did not arrive. Corbin called the relay and asked for verification. The relay's logs showed a packet, but no associated hull. Even the logistic network had no data. That mismatch became the bait for every rational mind aboard. Either the ship existed and someone had scrubbed the register, or the packet was a made thing, a crafted order sent down the chain for reasons that smelled like trickery, or worse, experiment. The man slept, and while he slept, the boat recorded his breathing like an instrument. The breathing fit the hull's rhythm, but the manifest never reconciled.
The first anomalous behavior we noticed was small and stupid, the way big events sometimes start with a pebble. The transferred man had surgery scars on his hands, but no service stripes. He could recite procedural codes, but his pronunciation of the Navy's call signs was wrong, as if he'd learned them in a language center and not by living them. He asked for a cigarette in a tone that made the XO tilt his head. He asked questions that made the chaplain uneasy. In a boat where identity is proven by detail, his gaps were glaring. Yet when the captain sent a low-priority verification up the chain again, a reply arrived within an hour, but it contained only a terse packet. Confirmed, Hargrove, proceed as ordered. That packet had the correct authentication tag, and yet, when we cross-checked Hargrove with allied registries, nothing existed. We received the confirmation, a packet with the correct tag, and the man continued to sleep as if nothing had happened. This is the kind of thing that eats at the hull's nerve. Machines can be trusted to an extent. VLF, HF logs, relay headers, checksum verifications, all of them lie on tape in the radio room. But machines also have failure modes, spoofed headers, relay node masquerading, and, in rare, terrifying cases, a packet that carries a chain of trust without an origin. The question becomes less about how and more about why. Why would someone fabricate a ship and route a man to us? Who benefits when a transfer occurs to a ghost hull? Is the man the payload, or is he the bait? The answer, when it came, arrived as a small human failure that didn't make the logs. The transferred man woke, smiled at the captain, and asked us to hand him a watch that didn't exist on board. There are protocols for this sort of thing. You separate the individual, you inventory, you pull the transcripts, you test his knowledge, you phone home in bandwidthed bursts, you log. The Navy is designed to turn mystery into charts. The charts don't always map human strangeness. Corbin and I spent long hours running the packet headers through black boxes and comparing CRCs. We found signatures. The packet's cryptographic cadence matched known fleet keys, yet the relay path had a blank where a relay station should be. That's like reading a train ticket that shows you rode on a platform that never was built. Something in the packet had the right keys, but there was nothing to connect the keys to a physical hull. It was trust without an address. Operationally, transfers demand presence. If a surface hull receives a man, someone logs the time, the rail, the ladder, the signature. Pictures are taken for manifests when circumstances permit. You do not move a human being and then pretend it did not happen. Yet the more we pressed, the more holes appeared. The relay that confirmed Hargrove suddenly showed a maintenance outage at the time of the operation, an outage that matched the billing for our own relay tests. In plain language, either someone tampered with the tower logs or someone had built an ad hoc relay chain to make the transfer look canonical.
There is a place where paper and radio meet that is more dangerous than either. We had wandered into that place. 2 nights later, another man was transferred. Same signature, different ship name, a different ghost hull. This time, the man refused to be screened. He refused to answer personal questions. He paced the wardroom like an animal that had learned a trick. He was easy to anger, quick to smile. He had no background. He had a wristwatch with the engraving of a ship that never sailed. The captain finally closed his mouth and did a thing I would never forget. He took the 2 manifests, the 2 transferred men, and laid them side by side. Then he took a blank manila envelope and wrote on it in heavy block letters, "For command only, log, transfer, unregistered hull."
He handed the envelope to the XO and told him to dispatch a secure channel to fleet. When a captain writes in block letters, it means fear has room to become action. The action that responded came back, not as a clear line of authority, but as a single question. Who else knew? The packeted reply asked for a list, radios that overheard, watchstanders who signed, names. And that's when the paranoia tightened. Our transmissions had been limited. Only a handful of coastal nets had received the manifest confirmation. The chain of custody for the transfer was tight on paper, but thin in practice. It gets worse. At midnight, in the small hours when the boat's skin is a tired nerve, the transferred man left the rack where we'd set him and walked to the head. He didn't use the light. He moved like someone who had walked night shifts inside other hulls. He came back with a folded scrap of paper and slid it under the captain's door. The scrap had a single line, scrawled in a hand that had seen too much salt. They move through permission. We move through names. Watch the names. Names are maps. If someone is moving through names, they are mapping the lines you think are solid. We had a problem that smelled like metal. Not the brassy odor of a failed gasket, but the flat, sterile smell of a record scrubbed until nothing but the shine of the paper remains. We had transfers with manila-stamped authority and no hull to sign them. Packets that presented credentials without an origin, and men who arrived like extras in a play they had not rehearsed for. If you live by paper and radio, and someone begins to weave authority without a home, the world gets very small, and the options become crude: obey, refuse, or probe. We probed. We took apart a packet like men disassembling a clock to find a hidden note. Corby and I worked nights. He fed the packet headers into boxes and software that the rest of the ship called the Black Drawer because no one liked to speak its name in the mess. We looked for the checksum that maps to the fleet's known keys, and we found it, but followed the signature back, and the chain dissolved like fog. The auth header matched a fleet key, but the relay nodes that should have processed the packet had blank entries where a relay name should be. The packet was, in shorthand, a validated lie. It had the shape of truth, but not the body. Legitimate keys used in an illegitimate place, like a familiar voice in a stranger's mouth. We took the manifest, the transfer slip, and the confirmation packet to the XO. He was a practical man who had slept fewer hours than his conscience could afford. He read the manifest with a magnifier until his knuckles went white. "We can't accept transfers from unknown hulls," he said, "but someone sent the order with the fleet's cadence. Someone crafted a packet to speak like them." "So it's a spoof, an attacker reusing known codes," I said. He pinched a line between his thumb and forefinger, thinking. "Or it's an inside job." Microhook. Inside jobs wear familiar hands. We broadened the net. Corby contacted a naval relay on HF and asked for packet traces. The relay returned a log that was maddening. At the time of confirmation, the chain showed a maintenance outage at one of the coastal towers. The outage, according to the log, was real, but the packet still showed up in the relay's buffer. That implies one thing: someone used a relay they controlled, or they created a local emitter that could impersonate the relay's signature. Man-in-the-middle attacks are not just a digital thing. They can be physical, they can be electromagnetic. You can make the sky tell a lie. You can fake a voice on the radio. The ocean does not care whether you are honest. We compared the transferred men's stories again and again. Both had stock surgical marks that looked professional. Both had identical sets of training phrases, language drilled into them with the rhythm of an exercise. Both could recite boarding procedures.
Both had empty records in the civil registries. One of them, the one we'd nicknamed Hargrove Man, had in his possession a small metal token stamped with a sequence that matched no registry we had. The token felt heavy and patient, like a coin cast from a story people wanted to forget. We started to build a map. The man had been picked up in the lee of an island chain where the sea has teeth. The manifest's origin was listed as an auxiliary vessel in the area. The packet's relay showed a maintenance outage, an engineered hole. The signatures matched known keys. Someone had assembled a puzzle that said, "Move this human, make it look like authority, and leave no home for the man to return to." Someone had spent patience and care to make a single transfer look like a legitimate bureaucracy, and that's the most frightening kind of craftsmanship. We needed to go after something you can see. Words and packets are one thing, a hull's wake is another. The captain decided we would shadow the next transfer. We would be present if someone tried the trick again. He ordered a restricted intercept. We would remain at sea, but approach the coordinates slow and quiet. We'd hide behind the lee of a small islet and photograph anything that came within a watchman's eye. The night felt like a held breath. The sea lay flat. The moon wore a thin coin of cloud. We drifted under cover, engines dead, baffles lowered, crew crouched like men in a cave. We readied the small boat and trained a camera on the lee where transfers had occurred before. Waiting for a trick makes the waiting itself a weapon. At 0240, a silhouette appeared, not a ship's profile, a small craft without identification lights, no flag, engine sound minimal. We tracked it visually and with radar. The small craft slipped into the lee and slowed. A man in a wet jacket stood in the bow. He looked like the others, scarred hands, a watch without a serial. The small boat made the approach. The transfer was quiet and efficient. But this time, we were ready. We bit the night with cameras and sent 2 men in the RIB to intercept, not to take the transferred man away, but to get close enough to read the craft's hull. The RIB moved silent and fast like a shadow. We came abreast and held off, letting the transfer occur. The transferred man stepped across the ladder, and in the faint moonlight we saw the hull of the small craft. There was no name. There was no number. There was a stenciled emblem, a circle with a blank center, like an eye. Emblems without names are flags for something beyond registry. The men on the small craft pulled away into the dark. The RIB scanned them briefly and recorded a hull number we couldn't find in the registries. We had footage. We had confirmation that a physical vessel, non-ghost, had been there. But when the XO called a coastal relay to ask about the hull, the relay returned, "No registered vessel matches the provided transponder ID. No such vessel in AIS." That token of a hull without a number suggested a different explanation. Perhaps the transfers were staged from vessels that fly no flag, vessels that don't carry AIS transponders, the sort of ad hoc logistics that intelligence or private contractors can use when they want plausible deniability. That's not far-fetched. There are always ships that operate below the tone of the register. A boat without a number is a boat that expects you to forget. We logged the event. We had pictures, confirmatory radar pips, and 1 transferred man sitting under the arcs of the wardroom lamp with a face like a mask. The command channel was pressed. We demanded a fleet-level response. The reply came in the form of a single terse packet. Stand down, hold position, maintain radio silence, await orders. Translation, do not escalate. Translation, let the matter be handled above your level. When orders arrive with the tone of a lid, the lid sits. A lid is heavy. You can try to pry it, but it may crush you if you force it. The captain, a man who had once disobeyed broad orders on principle, let the lid sit and swallowed it. He was a sailor who had made peace with the idea that sometimes orders and men do not match. An order to stand down smells like ink and smoke. We refused the standing down in the way men refuse things with craft. We worked the shadows. While we were ordered to hold position, Corby and I trawled older filings and found patterns. Other patrols in other seas had reported similar transfers, not identical but similar. Transfers to non-registered halls, packets with auth cadences, men who could not be found in the registry. Some were labeled logistical anomalies by stations that intended to bury them. A few lines in an old declassified blotter referenced a program name in parentheses, and in handwriting, a man had added in the margin, "Transfer Protocol, Ghost Ship." It was a clue, not a confession.
Sometimes bureaucracy leaves fingerprints in the margins. When you start to find pattern, the world becomes more dangerous. You suspect more people. You suspect that the benign shape you relied on, the Navy's orderly machinery, has facets no one taught you. The captain grew quiet. He walked to the window and stared at the sea like a man who had been betrayed by geography. He asked for a private channel to the squadron, a channel he had previously avoided. The reply was slow and then careful. Command is aware. Do not engage. Report only by secure channel. Await direction. There was a line added, no public statements. No public statements means the public should not know the structure that shipped people without names. We did one thing the orders did not forbid. We kept the transferred men separated and examined them more carefully. In private, the XO asked them things that the manifest did not insist on. Favorite port, first ship, schooling. One of them, the man we had nicknamed Hargrove because the manifest said so, mentioned a sequence of letters embedded in a tattoo on his left forearm, AT9. The letters matched nothing in our registry, but they matched a small stamped token Corbin had found in the satchel. We compared the token's stamping to known contractor marks. Nothing matched. The muscle memory of the man showed that he had practiced seamanship in a way that was professional but not domestic to our Navy. It was practice as a craft, measured in long nights on unknown decks. A tattoo is a map with no legend. One of our petty officers, a man named Leon, had a cousin who did port work in an Allied commercial yard. Leon called the cousin with a coded question, and the cousin came back with a name. Sometimes there are barges around islands with no AIS. They unload things at night. Contractors. Nobody loves to log them. The Navy sometimes uses them when they want plausible deniability. The cousin's tone was a little too comfortable. That suggested contracting. That suggested layers. Plausible deniability always leaves a rope behind. We pressed the Navy channels again. This time the request asked for a bit more than a lid. We asked for authorization fragments. Who had the authority to create an off-header that matched fleet cadence? The reply came back with a line that read, "Authorization trace leads to internal maintenance test key 17B. Key issued 1979. Deprecated. Suggest reviewing archival chains." That was the bureaucratic way to tell us that someone had used an old key that was supposed to be retired, an old skeleton key, and that when someone does that, they can create old voices that the present cannot disprove. Someone had reached into the archive and used a history the machine trusted. Old keys open old doors, and sometimes the doors stay open.
At this point, suspicion hardened into a hypothesis, a program that used deprecated keys to create plausible manifests for ad hoc vessels that took on humans and moved them into unregistered lines of custody. The purpose, the why, resisted easy answers. Was it exile, extraction, kidnapping, or a cloaked official program? Each hypothesis carried its own weight of horror. We could not prove which horror had teeth. So we did the simplest practical thing a submarine can do. We shadowed. We followed the next scheduled coordinates and kept our eyes on the lee. The third transfer, and you can always tell the universe when a pattern is a pattern, occurred almost on schedule. Same craft, same emblem, another man with a name that matched a ship that wasn't there. This time, the small boat was carrying equipment, a sealed crate, a case stamped with a contractor's logo. We photographed the crate being handed over and found, when the men who handled it opened it an hour later, a device that looked like a ruggedized radio with a custom patch. The radio had no external identifiers. The case had thermal insulation scorch marks, as if it had once been through fire. Equipment and humans were traveling together like contraband twins. That crate changed everything. We tested the radio in a shielded box. It broadcasts in non-standard cadence with short bursts on VLF bands that hide in the ocean's belly. The device's firmware, someone with a soldering iron and patience had made it, carried a small routine that would accept a packet that looked like authority and then create a mimic packet back. It was a gateway and a mask, an emitter that could pretend to be a fleet relay. In cleaner's terms, it is a lie machine. In operational terms, it is a way to inject an order into the network that carries an empty address. A radio that lies is more dangerous than a gun because it makes you obey. When we traced the radio's hardware, we found microstamps used by a small set of defense contractors that often did work for classified projects. The stamps were legitimate, the company existed, but the contract number on the crate pointed to a subcontractor that had been dissolved and quietly absorbed by another company 2 years prior. The money trail had been laundered by corporate steps. You can bury ugly things under legal scaffolding. That is how the world often hides what it does not want to be seen. We escalated again. This time, the captain did not ask for permission. He took whatever courage gets built inside long service and ordered a discreet intercept. We would cut the small craft's approach, force it to stop, and demand identity. It felt like an act of treason and law at the same time.
We cut across their bow and aimed the spotlight. The small craft stopped. Men jumped. We ordered them to heave to. The engine sputtered and died. We closed. The boat's hull had the emblem, a ring, blank center. And on the transom, in hand-painted letters, was a number, not in any registry we had seen. The numbers people need to believe in are numbers people can check. These could not be checked. We boarded. There were 3 men. They looked like deckhands with the careless courage of men used to moving in the dark. The RIB's boarding team secured them, and we brought them to the sub. The men would not speak about their ship. They answered with carefully rehearsed phrases and turned their eyes away when we asked for manifests. Their skipper, a large man who might once have been in uniform, had a scar across his knuckles and a manner of someone who had been paid to keep things quiet. We inspected the boat. It had engine modifications to minimize AIS broadcasting. Its panels had been rewired. The radio had a mount for the same type of crate we had found. At the bottom of the hull lay a reel with a stencil, Property, Contractor 7. We found a manifest rolled under the cushion. It was blank except for a stamp we could not trace. The stamp had the same ring as the emblem, a blank center that refused to hold a name.
Blank centers are full of meaning for people who know how to read absence. We had them all on our boat. The captain demanded the names. The men gave a set of names, carefully chosen and wrong. Their birth dates had gaps in the registry. Their IDs had serials that matched contractors, but not sailors. They were neither purely civilian nor military. They were a hybrid of necessity. And then the smallest of them, with a shaking laugh, said one thing that made the captain go very still. "You don't want to be the next transfer." Threats in a whisper are louder than bombs. We detained them. We documented everything. We sent packets up the chain and asked for pickup. The reply we received was bureaucratic sympathies and a single order. Release the men to local authorities in the next port. Do not make public the details. That is the bureaucratic way of closing the mouth of a storm. Send it inland. The war of documents treats human beings like ink that can be redirected. We complied under protest. The transferred men were turned over as ordered in the next port, and the RIB crew returned to our boat with the taste of salt and unease. The contractor's men had a final word as they were led away. "You'll learn you were chosen." Then they were gone, swallowed into systems that eat people and spit out paperwork. The last words of men who move through secret transfers are always about selection. After that, the boat's captain called a meeting for a secrecy oath. This is standard for events that cross the line between operational and political. The men sign that they will not disclose what they saw under penalty of disciplinary or legal pain. The rules of secrecy are not just military. They are the salt you rub into the wound to stop the bleeding but keep the hurt. Men signed, some because they believed, some because they feared, some because loyalty is a thing that is taught and thus obeyed. But seals and signatures do not stop a mind from noticing patterns. The pattern we noticed was simple and terrifying. These ghost transfers were a mechanism for moving people, sometimes men, sometimes equipment, using obsolete keys and black market hulls. Why? To hide custody, to move people to places outside of oversight, to use the machinery of a navy to give otherwise lawless actions the sheen of authority. When I pushed the question hard, a quiet man in a suit at the squadron office said a single thing that tasted like hot iron. There are things the state moves it prefers not to discuss. Some are for national security. He used the phrase as if it were the end of the conversation. Of course it wasn't. That phrase carries a weight heavier than any hall number. It implies that some violences are official, even as they are off-record. You read that, and you know the state may sanction extra-legal acts in the name of security. The phrase, national security, is a door you do not open alone. We had another data point. Months later, a whistleblower's memo, something that landed briefly in the hands of a contractor we knew, contained a line about legacy extraction protocols and referenced tiny letters HPTAN. It suggested an internal program that used contractor vessels and deprecated keys to move assets. The memo read like a note to self: maintain plausible deniability, use contractor hulls, rotate keys. It was not direct proof, but it was a spoonful of a larger soup. Sometimes a leaked memo is only the edge of a larger machine. The story does not end with a courtroom or an exposé. It ends in the small and private ways men react to moral rot. I left the Navy not because I was forced, but because the shape of the work had changed in subtle and unacceptable ways. I had signed up to fix pumps and keep men alive. I did not sign up to be complicit in moving humans as if they were freight without faces.
On my last night aboard, the captain called me into his office. He had been quiet the whole patrol, the way a man gets quiet when he has been given more than one order that conflicts with one another. "Are you going ashore for good?" he asked. "Yes," I said.
If there is a final detail, the last micro hook you'll carry in your pocket after listening to me for this long, it is not a proof or a piece of paper. It is names. On a quiet day in port, I opened a ledger I had kept, old habit, and found a single line someone had scribbled in the night while we were at sea. If they move through names, names will move through you. I looked up. There was a postcard pinned to the mess board, a child's drawing of a ship with no number, only a smiling face. I tore it down and folded it into the pocket with the token. The sea teaches you one final vocabulary. There are things the world will do with names because names permit movement. If someone can write the name of a ship and make a packet to match, they can make bones move. That is power, and power without home is dangerous. Names that move you are the worst kind of map. I do not pretend there was a single villain in this story, no masked mastermind in a trench coat. There were hands and signatures and companies and men who understood contingency and who used legal scaffolding to shelter illegal motion. There were also men who did things they thought were for national security and trusted that the world would not ask too many questions. Mostly, there was a system that let names be used as routes, and when names become routes, men disappear between the lines. If you listen for the sound of the sea when it's quiet, you will sometimes hear a small radio static, the kind that means a VLF packet is passing through the belly of water. You will not understand it. You will not be meant to. And if you are unlucky enough to be the person who opens the envelope of a manifest with a ghost shell printed on it, you will know the shape of the problem. I carry the token and the ledger and a small private oath. I will not be the man who waits for a name to be written next to mine with a pen that isn't mine to sign. The last thing you should remember is the look of a man who arrives with no past and no port. He is not always the victim. Sometimes he is the instrument.